Yes and no. But okay, let's come back around to Secret Space program. Why don't you talk to me about Project Pegasus, cryogenics, and related matters?
Pegasus was really kicking off in the 70s. That was before my time, with the ship and all that story. But the 80s kids were post Pegasus. I met some of the programmers there, Duncan Cameron and a couple of the other ones from Montauk at New York. But I don't really have much to say about them, and I don't really want to go into that. But with the Secret Space program, groups of super soldiers were brought up into that program in hopes of becoming a dark legion of ascended machinery, per se. Have you ever heard of the term ascended machinery? Okay, so they were brought into this kingdom that was part of space in a vector, like a quadrant realm of its own. And what the enemy did with these kids is that he sealed them into a cybernetic matrix. And these were coined sentinel seed pods. And around these pods, there was a greenish cloud brain interface system around it that connected all of us. And this acted like a womb. And this is also what one of your guests also described as the coffin-like boxes that were called the originals in space. So vital info, they did this membrane thing around us in the cloud brain because all vital information is always found in a membrane of anything. And it was a greenish energy. And you also find this greenish energy at Montauk. You find this greenish energy in pyramids, and it's called the green line. So that extended not just from the Earth pyramids, satanic places, but also up into space too. So green line programming was also a thing. And we were sealed into these serpent sentinel, they were like sentient pods. And it was like a sentient lock that had a snake on the outside of it. And each pod was called a sentinel seed pod. And inside we were infected with black space goo. And the bondage of the system that was set in space, the power of it was our vows that we made to keep each other's secrets. And this is why it's also so hard to deprogram a super soldier, because they vowed that, because of the fear and the things that they saw up there. And it's like we have backup muscle memory, robotic training that we had from the Sentinel, because it would be a voice that would say Sentinel says, and then our bodies would have to move robotically. At one point, we had to make sure that we were Roman numerals and have Roman numeral gestures in our muscles and only respond in a robotic way to the programmers. And then also our eye would be hijacked too. This all started at Montauk and went into space, this robotic Sentinel programming. So the only way I can describe it is like it was a vacuum space. In deep space, frequencies can ping long distance ranges and be heard long range. So it was very empty. It was a very vacant space. And the black goo, what it did to some of us was you would see an S that it would form, and it would be inside of our eyes, and it would mutate. So that's like branding you a Satan Sentinel seed, a satanic SS super soldier. And that's why I've said before, you can't fake what they've put in you, because they check in your eye. So Lucifer, of course, was the principality over this domain, this region. And he was also nicknamed Airman. And when he would come by, we would hear the whooshing of wings in this place. And then we would be opened in our Sentinel seed pods and let out to meet him in this like free fall gravity type of vacuum space. And you'd hear his wings, he'd come and visit you up in this region. So what he was doing, he was checking to see if his Sentinel seeds were growing. And what he didn't realize is that some of these chosen ones were actually God's chosen ones. So, the only way I can describe what was in the Sentinel pod was on our temples, we had a template that hooked us up almost like with a needle into the Sentinel seed pod. And you would hear the serpent whisper lies to you. from the time that you were born. And this is also why it's very hard to deprogram a super soldier, because some of them are taken as infants, and in the system, they were spoken lies to, hate Yahweh, and all these other things that would just regurgitate in their minds if you couldn't disconnect from that. So it was like a feeding port almost. So the serpent would tell you lies in this part of your temple. It was like a hook that was in your temple. And it felt like when this hooked into you and you heard those lies of the serpent repeating, that you were in a dry desert. And these children are also called indigo, blues, or platinum digital children because of the cybernetics that they've been exposed to and amalgamated with. So we would float in these areas when the seed pods were opened, and it would propel you up and out. And the strangest thing about when this happened is that when we came up out of our pods and Lucifer was up in the air checking on us, we would look over at each other and everybody floating out of their pods in free fall space. And we would be in our original forms that God created us in and what God intended for us to be in. And that's one thing that the enemy could not take away. So I always knew that there was something more to that, because we'll all appear to God in our original form that he intended when we go to the great white judgment seat. We're going to be in that image that God created us to have. Or you can change your body, you can become a transvestite, but you can fool man, but you can't fool God. You know what I mean? Our morphogenetics, transfiguration, our resurrection power is in us. It's already working in it. If you're God's child, they can't take that away in and out of God's design. They can't take that away. So I saw what that looks like and the difference between what they try to do and God's transfigurative power instead. So I look over and I actually saw Casbolt come out, but he was like white hair. He had white hair and he was a light-filled boy. And that was the image that God created him to be. Even though he was directly in the presence of Lucifer, he was in the image that God created him to be, as that little boy that still had purity, that still had innocence. Even though he was in a realm of captivity, that was still there. So that was really beautiful to see. And the other strange thing about when our seed pods opened is that when we were inside of them, Dan, we would feel like we were crushed, like we were a little fetus, like we were a baby. And that was a trick of the kingdom of darkness to make us think that we were powerless, that we were small, and that we were going to stay in that infancy form like a little child forever. Like we felt like a toddler even. But when it opened, we'd come out, and sometimes we would be in a bigger body. We would be like in a strong teenager body or other instances. So I realized just how physical and morphogenetically real this battle goes in the supernatural. So that was just, that was amazing to see. But God has a lot to say about this stuff and how they do take over bodies. But how they can't take away what God owns, basically. God says, they can't take you from my hand.
You made so many points. I've heard that thing about the eye so many times. They're looking through my eye. They're transferring data through their eyes. It's the eye thing. I mean, or they have a chip in my eye. So many times that has been a theme, as has black goo. And, we realize that at least two ingredients seem to be death and artificial intelligence. We put a prayer together that seems to have helped a number of people. But, I think it's really interesting. And this is the thing I think is very interesting. I don't think the world realizes just how many people walking the face of the planet have been implicated in this satanic space program.
Right.
As soul fragments or pieces of consciousness that are not in the body, but being used or being taken and put back on a regular basis. I want to get your perspective on that. I mean, how big do you think the overarching program really is? I know you were a specialist in it, but
I think the percentage is a lot more than what people think, because like I said, I think that the world is already half hybridized and people are forms of synthetics and clones and drones. And if there's not a soul there, you got to have that discernment to know what am I talking about. But I think it's increased exponentially. The saints are protected. God will always protect people, yes, and his remnant, but the ones who would just go with something like this in that program, I think it has increased because there's a separation happening between the tares and the wheats, for one, and that dividing line. And time is being sped up for the elect's sake. So it is happening more exponentially. So that's why we have to rescue more fervently and do the will of God more fervently so that we can, not miss the mark and fulfill our scrolls and our destinies.
All right. So I want to talk to you about the Anunnaki. And this is a really big subject because so many people that get into the secret space program and super soldiers conversations seem to be finding their way to a conclusion that the Anunnaki are more involved as creators of the human race, that Jesus in the Bible is expired, that this is really where the true answers lie when we understand our purpose from this vantage point, which of course I think we both agree is a pile of baloney. But the Anunnaki nonetheless are a real group. They have a real planet. They have a lot of technology, and they are definitely very involved. And so I want to just turn you loose on that subject. Tell us about it.
Sure. The Nabaru is what we called it. They already came and went in the 80s, and that's what B was about. The Nabaru, the thing that people think is Nibiru or whatever coming back, is just a piece of hardware that's orbiting in reverse from when they got kicked off, because God intervened at Montauk and divine intervention happened there. And it was like a galactic warfare where God himself had to step down and say, no, you're not going to use this time travel technology and do whatever you want with it. No, you're not going to just keep killing my children. No, you're not going to keep doing this at the North Pole. Like everything that was connected, he had to come in and intervene. And it's what I call the time wars. So they were bound and kicked out at that time. And anybody who thinks that they're creators or whatnot, I would just encourage them to read what I experienced at Montauk, because all I saw was bloodthirsty demons, is what I called them. And that's all that they were. That's all that they were there for. And taking over people's bodies, infecting them. And it's pure malevolence. There's no benevolence in the Anunnaki race whatsoever. So they weren't in this secret space sector, this vector that we were in. This was just designated to Lucifer's special little area alone. But what happened at the end of this Sentinel seed pod program that I was in was that angels came actually and rescued some of us. And then they allowed us to go back and rescue others. So it was a beautiful space rescue operation that God had designed and planned before our pre-birth process. So what happened is that I called upon the angels in the seed pod. My seed pod opened. One of the angels actually came in and put a white fire letter into the snake lock, because it was also sentient and it needed to unlock it by divine force. That broke off. He put the white fire letter into my seed lock and literally set me free from it. I come out, and then I propelled to the angels where they were standing, not the subspace. They were in subspace. It was different types of matter. This is very hard to explain. There's different types of matter that go on in space. And there's antimatter universe and there's matter universe. So they taught me about that too. So when they rescued me, I went with them, and they blinked me out of their subspace, because they told me that subspace that they operate in can travel faster than what's in Terra Earth, or what was in that brain cloud network seed pod that was holding us in stasis, due to the mass differential between the matter and antimatter universe and all of its varying substrates. So after I went to them, I just propelled gently to the angels. They landed me back in my driveway at home. And I look over and I see these satanic agents that just blinked and followed me, because it can happen in the blink of an eye, the travel that happens interdimensionally. This is the interdimensional play that happens can happen faster than what people think. That happens between flesh and spirit. I just want to drive that home. So I just looked at them and I knew that I was safe, and I went back into my house. And this is why a lot of the super movies also came out in the 80s, because of Satan's space program like that. And they tried to hack into your neural lace because they wanted to make, like you said, a copy of your brain into a computer and use that as a manifestation template, since they can't create much. And what they were looking for with people like me and people who survive this type of stuff is the time vector codes that they knew were interfaced in basically our brain folds, because once God seals and locks something out, they try to get back in, because like the Garden of Eden, you can't get back in there. But there's other areas where God just puts an X that says, no, you can't go back. You're off limits. So they hunted down children, and NASA did too, that they thought had time vector codes, and the NSA, I mean. But NASA uses the vector codes, but they're baby vector codes compared to God's quantum physics vector codes. So we compartmentalize a lot of this stuff from the quantum domain experience and interface. God canceled a lot of these programs out. The angels sealed off those areas. And what happens is that quantum waveform collapses, and there's no entry back, and it's done. It's part of the finished work. So what I went through is a testament of how the war in heaven is still ongoing, but came to earth, and to declare the goodness of God, and that he can rescue in space, and that he does rescue in space.